Hi, welcome to Matt's Garage. Today we're going to be talking about leaf springs and reverse shackles. This is part of my project to work on this 1972 International Scout II. I'm doing this episode as sort of like, it's not an intro to leaf springs because those are like, a leaf spring is part of the suspension. This is more like, here's really what's going on and what the opinions are in our reverse shackle and what the opinions on our shackle forward and how does the whole thing work and angle and all that stuff. I'm gonna have more detailed videos on it later, but today I just want to show you the wheel well and yeah, give you a rundown. Okay, here we are, the Scout's front suspension. Now this is not a stock suspension. This has a shackle reversal kit on that. So what does that mean? That means on the stock Scouts, the shackle is up front here, just like on Jeep YJs and older Jeeps. The eyelet is about there and the shackle usually angles out about here, okay? And the other side is fixed with two tabs that attach to the back of the leaf spring. These are Alkin leaf springs. They're custom, they're very flat, and that's because I've got a spring over axle setup on my Scout, obviously. The springs sit on top of the axle, right? So that's a very involved process. It involves cutting and turning the knuckles. I'm not going to get into that now. Whether your springs are over or under, you can do a reverse shackle. I don't like it, and I'm going to switch back, but I just want to talk about it while it's here so that you understand why guys do this. So the first thing is when you're driving and you're hitting bump after bump, right? It takes the energy to the back versus trying to push forward, right? So the shackle swings away from the fixed end. The spring compresses and gets flatter. Like if it's an arch, it gets flatter. As it gets flatter, it gets longer. Right? You can see like the distance between my fingertip and my palm is that, and then as I stretch it out, it gets longer. So in order to accommodate that spring motion, the shackle has to swing. Okay. So in this case, it's swinging to the rear, which means the truck will absorb bumps better, in theory, than if the shackles are forward. Also, you know, this acts like a locating, like a trailing arm or a locating arm, like a link, basically, in a link suspension, because this is fixed and this is fixed, so that kind of fixes it there, and the floating's in the back. Again, taking the energy in the direction of travel. The other thing it does, theoretically, is give stability. I had a lot of stuff done when I did this, so I can't tell if what that made it more stable or not, but that's what they say, is it makes it more stable. Okay, so why don't I like a reverse shackle kit? Well, first of all, if you have a very arched spring, this doesn't really apply. So when your spring is arched and it stretches, right, it pushes the shackle a lot. So your shackle can be in the vertical position, basically 90 degrees from here. So like 90. And then as it straightens out, it'll go like that, right? But with a flat spring, there's not a lot of that there. So you need to have a little more angle in your shackle. At least that's my theory from what I've been reading and researching and checking out the formulas for calculating this stuff. You want it to have a little more angle than I currently have. Now, the way you calculate it is not the way you would calculate it like off of the frame or the way you calculate other things. The way you do it is you lay something like that on there. And then, all right, so for a flat spring like mine in the front, you want the angle to be like 30 degrees, and this one is 15 degrees. So 90 would be straight up and down. Sorry for the ghost face killer. Straight up and down would be 90. You really want this to be at like 60. Now, technically the whole thing angles a little this way, so you have to compensate for that, but in fact we can measure that because I laid this bar across here. So let's measure the bar angle. I know the digital ones are faster. That is 5 degrees, 6 degrees. So that's 6 degrees up, which means it's going to be 6 degrees more than whatever this reads. So this reads 15, so this is at 20. And it really should be closer to 30 or 35. With a flat spring, that means when it compresses, it'll go out to 40 or 45, which is where you want to be at flat spring compression. There's actually a formula for this that involves like sine and trigonometry. I'm going to get into that on another episode, like when I'm actually doing the shackle reversal. But with a shackle reversal, it's hard to get that 45 because this has nowhere to go. You know, if you mount it up here and it's a steep angle, it's just going to hit the frame. So it doesn't. Now on mine, I could probably get away with just moving it up, but then I'm putting a hole right next to my existing hole. So I don't think I'm going to do that. One other thing I really don't like about reverse shackles is these fangs. And the reason these fangs have to be here is like, why don't you just bolt it up here? It's because this angle gets too crazy, right? Now you can cut and turn your knuckles and change the way your to get the right caster and the right pinion angle to compensate for having it up like this. But then what that's not really the problem. The problem is instead of a spring absorbing a force along this plane, which is stable, more stable than flat, you want it to be a little bit upwards. So when you get too far, now it's like you can imagine the energy is pushing the truck that way when it's absorbing versus up, right? It's pushing it too far. Like if you can imagine if it was like this, yeah, obviously the spring would be pushing like that. So the more this datum line of the spring angles up, the weirder the energy transfer, if that makes sense. So that's why you have to have the fangs. That's one reason. The second reason is, now I've got the Mike's high steer setup on here, but regardless of your steering setup, if you don't have the fangs, you're banging onto your tie rod. So you also need it for steering connection clearances. I believe. I could be wrong about that one. Not gonna lie. Right, so the frame is much thicker than the Scout springs. Now, this doesn't apply for like Jeeps and Chevys. They have wider springs. These are two-inch springs. So because the frame's wider, there has to be a spacer on the inside of this shackle to locate and stabilize this eye for the leaf spring, and that's kind of janky. And you know what? Bottom line is, this isn't how the Scout was designed. It was designed with the shackles forward, and there's a reason for it. So I'm going to do it. What's nice about having the Scout shackles is there's a spring steel connector that connects the front shackles, and that acts like a stabilizer bar. I'll get more into that on the next, when I actually get around to doing that work. I hope that was interesting. A little geeked out, but didn't go nearly as far as I could have because I didn't even get into inner leaf friction and the whole sine, cosine, tangent business. It's like math is hard, and I didn't really address shackle length either. So that's also a different story, and I will talk about that more in detail later. I'm more just testing the waters to see if people find this interesting. Like, oh, I totally just remembered another reason. So when you have it. When your fixed side is here and your spring's going like that, you know, it's pushing the front drive shaft up towards the transmission. Whereas if I change it, put the fixed end here and the moving end here, the shackle here, it's pulling the front axle away from the transfer case. And so you get, you know, the downside of that is if you don't have enough spline, then your front drive shaft can come apart. But you get less nosedive, so reverse shackle gives you more nosedive. And I've got a clearance issue between my front drive shaft and the transmission pan. So once I go back to shackle reversal, that'll certainly give me my splines back because I'm really short on splines. And then we'll see if I still have the interference issue. And so that's another reason why I'm reversing my reverse shackle. I'm not saying reverse shackles are bad. I think they're probably better for a stock spring under application. I think for the spring over, you stick with the shackle forward. And I'm like a low rider kind of guy. Like, I don't want my Scout too tall. But if you like your Scout tall, then you do the spring over. You put lifted springs on there, and you set that shackle angle, and you get a ton of flex out of the thing. So, and some guys run long springs in the front, which is cool. I've seen it, but man, those guys just turn and the whole Scout leans over like that. So anyway, that's how a reverse shackle and leaf springs kind of work. Kinda. There's so much more to it. I'm not pretending I know everything, all right? But I will see you next time on Matt's Garage.